Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to do the proposed minimum requirement for Stellar Blade. This is the demo, but the game should be the same or similar. The minimum requirement go as follow: i5 7600K or AMD Ryzen 5 1600X, 16GB of RAM, the GTX 1060 6GB variant or the RX 580 8GB variant, the X12 75GB of storage, and we have a preset of low settings at 1080p to get an average of 60 FPS target. HDD supported but SSD recommended. Welcome to Response PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. Starting off with the i5 7600K, 16GB of RAM and the GTX 1060 6GB variant at 1080p, low settings and FSR AA have been preset by default, auto-selected, so we're going to leave it at that for now, but we're going to try it without it also. So with the default setting of low and FSR AA, we get an average of 88 FPS. GPU is big at 99% using 3.8 to 4.2 GB of VRAM. The CPU is in the mid-70 and we're using 9 GB of RAM. We are quite way over the 60 FPS target, even though they put FSR AA enabled by default. But the game is highly playable, I barely see any artifact going on, and the frame time is quite smooth, even with upscaling enabled. We're keeping the same setup and the same settings, but disabling any upscaling, so we're now at 1080p, low settings, no upscale of any kind. For all the people there that don't want to know or want to deal with any upscaling, the result is surprisingly good. We are at 63 FPS average, with the GPU not exactly pegged at 100%, we are in the mid-90s of percentage of utilization, using 4.6 GB of VRAM. CPU wise we are in the high 50s, low 60, and we're using 10.5 GB of RAM. It feels a bit smoother and look a little bit better. I'll be happy to play at those settings. Maybe that's what the dev was targeting, but they didn't say in the description. So 1080p, low settings, 60 FPS without upscaling. But I just start the game and this is only the demo, or maybe later in game, when it's more open or more enemies, we may have a drop in FPS here and there, but so far, so good. Switching to the AMD side, I have the Ryzen 5 1600 non-X with the RX 580 and 16GB of RAM. We're still at 1080p, low settings, and by default, FSR AA. With the GPU pegged at 99% using 4.7GB of VRAM out of 8, we get an average of 76 FPS. Still highly playable, but way lower than the GTX 1060, which we are at 88 FPS for the same settings. The CPU is in the mid-40s and we're using 12GB of VRAM. Frame time is smooth and barely any glitches in the visual with upscaling. But I'm sure this will feel quite well also without any kind of FSR or upscaling. So let's try that out. And it surprisingly play well. Actually better than the GTX 1060 without upscaling. We are now an average of 70 FPS, while the GTX 1060 without FSR or upscaling was giving us 63 FPS. The GPU is pegged at 99% using 4.9 GB of VRAM out of 8, CPU usage in the mid-50s and using 11.4 GB of RAM. Frame time is smooth enough that you don't feel it, so in the end, CPU Intel or AMD, they're quite a decent result. GPU Nvidia or AMD, they're quite on the target to 60 FPS low settings. If you don't use any upscaling or FSR, just make sure to disable it because by default it will be enabled. It's just that they didn't include any Intel Arc GPU for the minimum requirement. My guess it should have been the A380, but you'll see in the upcoming video. Stellar Blade on Intel Arc GPU. Other than that, I said the dev was quite on mark with the minimum requirement. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one, and subscribe.